Welcome back to Crypto for Christians, where we examine the revolution of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency and the impact that these have on our world, including the incredible opportunity for influence which is available to us as Christians. So thank you for joining us today. Now, last time we discussed how valuable this technology will be for people in general due to the way it decentralizes control in business and finance. Now, what this does is it takes power away from the big institutions such as governments and large banks, and it gives it back to the individual. Now, this is why so many people are embracing this technology and why we feel it will only increase moving forward. Now, there are many variations of ways to implement this technology, so I know that it can seem confusing at first. Now, as I understand it, there's different forms of blockchains, and then there are different cryptocurrencies built on those platforms. But there are other ways to apply this technology. And so I wanted to ask you, Alex, you have depth of knowledge about this subject. Help us to understand more about the different variations that we hear about.
I'll really do that, Rick. So I think I'm just going to start from the top, and we'll start with what everybody's heard of, and then we'll just go down from there. So today, I'd like to talk about Bitcoin, and then we'll also talk about Ethereum. We'll talk about smart contracts and all of the potential there. I'm going to make a case for Ethereum in this video, and then we're going to make a counter case in a later video. And we may get a chance also to talk about oracles today. But for now, let's just start with Bitcoin. What is it and how does it work? Well, what Bitcoin is it's really the first decentralized blockchain of its kind. Now, there were some precursors and there were some other computerized efforts prior to Bitcoin, but nothing ever really did what Bitcoin does in the blockchain sense prior to Bitcoin. So it really is a revolutionary technology. And to put it simply, my best metaphor for what Bitcoin is it's very much like a Model T Ford. So picture yourself back in the early 19-teens, and you see somebody driving a carriage down the street and he doesn't have a horse. And you run up to him and ask him what it is, and he tells you, well, this is a Model T Ford. And probably the first thing you'd want to do after you saw that is run out and get a Model T. And by the way, they were pretty much the best mass-produced car ever made at the time. Pretty nifty stuff, that horseless carriage. Well, Bitcoin is really the same way. It's the first decentralized, fully cryptographically secure blockchain that is able to reliably transfer value. And what that means is that if I send you a Bitcoin, you can be sure, you can verify the transaction and be sure that what I sent you is an actual Bitcoin. That it's not something that I made up on my computer, that it's not faked. This is actually registered with the Bitcoin blockchain, and you can keep that Bitcoin or sell it to somebody else, and they can be equally sure that what you're selling them is an actual Bitcoin, which, by the way, has a limited supply. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins issued, and most of them have already been issued, by the way, and about 3.5 million of them have been lost by people who were careless with their Bitcoins, on jump drives and things like that. So that's what Bitcoin is. It does what it does quite well. It's very reliable, very cryptographically secure. It's a really solid blockchain, the same way that a Model T Ford is a really solid vehicle. It really will take you from one place to another, and it'll do it without a horse. The one thing about it, a Model T Ford, is going to be that it's kind of slow, and it doesn't have all the extra features that we've come to appreciate about, what you actually can build into a vehicle. Bitcoin blockchain is the same way. Bitcoin really only does that one value transfer trick, and the same way that every car will take you from one place to another, well, just about every blockchain can do that value transfer trick where you can have 100% security and verifiability that what you have is an actual piece of cryptocurrency. So what Bitcoin is it's the first mover. It's the first person in place, front of the line. And that's why if you went back in time to maybe 1922 or 1923, there were a lot of different cars coming out, and there were still a lot of Model T Fords on the road. A lot of people bought that Model T. They liked it quite a bit. It was their first horseless carriage. They kind of fell in love with it. And, they kept driving them as long as they would last. And I think that's the situation that we're in with Bitcoin right now. Bitcoin was first in space. People bought them early. It went up in value. They fell in love with it because they made a lot of money. And now they like to hold on to it and trade it. And that's what you can do with Bitcoin. That's also just about all you can do with Bitcoin. It doesn't do much else. And the same way a Model T is not good for racing and not good for going off-road, Bitcoin doesn't do very much other than transfer value. Now, around 2014, some computer researchers got together, and they were very impressed with Bitcoin. They loved this little value transfer trick, so they built that into their blockchain. But they also had an idea that a blockchain could actually support computer programs, that you could actually start putting computer programs onto a blockchain, and that those computer programs could accomplish all sorts of different things. And these wonderful folks, people including Vitalik Buterin, Charles Hoskinson, and a guy named Wood, got together, Gavin Wood, got together and made the Ethereum blockchain. Now, the Ethereum blockchain does the value transfer trick just perfectly, but it also supports what they call smart contracts. And smart contracts are computer programs. You can also sometimes hear the word decentralized applications. And these are programs that live on the blockchain. They don't live in the cloud. They don't live on your computer. You don't need to put them onto a jump drive. These programs run on the blockchain, which may be part of several different clouds. There's no way to really track it down. But as we've talked about in previous discussions, it's everywhere. So it makes it decentralized. It makes it sort of impossible to shut these programs down. And it also has all the benefits of recording whatever the activity of the program is on the blockchain. Now, I'm going to give some examples of decentralized applications, but before I do, I want to really talk a lot about smart contracts in the most simple sense. So smart contracts is one of the most important concepts in blockchain, and it is also the concept that is probably going to change the world the most. So when we think about contracts, well, your mind might jump to, I don't know, some kind of arrangement between companies, and that is a type of contract for sure. But actually, anytime we get people to agree to something, even something as simple as stopping at a stoplight, in a way, that is a contractual transaction. Okay, so in the United States, we do quite well with our system of stoplights. Basically, everybody on the road has agreed that if the light turns red, they're going to stop, and that when the light turns green for the other people, we're going to let them go. And believe it or not, that's a type of social contract that all of us follow. You might be interested to know that there are countries where they've had a very big problem getting people to agree to this social contract because the foundation, the historical foundation, isn't there. So a country like Iran, for example, went from being a very relatively poor country where people were literally walking or riding camels for transportation, and they struck oil and made a lot of money very rapidly. And so they built modern roads and they built stoplights. The only problem is that no one would stop at the stoplights. And so there was just enormous amounts of congestion. There was enormous amounts of congestion for years and years in Iran because people would not sort of go along with this contract. It took decades of enforcing infrastructure to get folks to, basically issuing tickets to get folks to go along with this kind of a social contract. Another example of a contract might be if you pulled up to an intersection, a four-way intersection, and at the same time, and both cars want to go this way. Well, the question is, which car is going to go first? And usually we'll negotiate a little nonverbal contract between the two of us. So I'll wave and point to you and say, you go first, and you'll say, okay, and then you go first, and then I follow. Believe it or not, that's an example of a contract. Well, the way smart contracts can work, that's a very good metaphor and actually an actual real world example for how smart contracts can work. So when cars do start driving themselves, What will self-driving cars do when they arrive at an intersection at the same time? You've got a Tesla over here and a Nissan over here. What are they going to do? Well, what will actually happen is that no matter what computer program they're running at the time, the Tesla program and the Nissan program, what they'll do is for that moment that they pull up, they'll jump onto a blockchain. And on that blockchain, the computers will negotiate a smart contract, a very simple one. The contract goes this way. This car goes first, this car goes second. And for the time period that they're both driving, both cars will be running the same computer program on a blockchain like Ethereum. And so that's a simple example of a smart contract. Now, a more complicated example might be if you were to sell your house. Now, today, if you sell your house, anybody who's ever bought or sold a house knows that there's a pile of contract work that has to be written up by title companies and real estate attorneys and real estate agents. It's probably about 100 pages or more to acquire a house in the United States. And all of these things are contractual agreements that have to do with house insurance and paying off the mortgage and all of these things, each one represented by a different set of documents, all of which has been reviewed by a lawyer, and all of which has to be signed in the presence of a notary public to prove that I'm actually the buyer of the house and that you're actually the seller of the house. All this has to be verified by third parties. Well, they're already selling houses on the blockchain. And the way they do it is really straightforward. They tokenize the house, and the terms of the sale are written into the smart contract on the blockchain. And when the correct amount of funds and the other terms of the contract are met, the transaction occurs so that you then receive the token on your side, and you now own the house. Lock, stock, and barrel. You have the title of it, or if you have a mortgage, you have a deed, and the bank holds the terms of the smart contract that was agreed to by you pumping funds into the coin that tokenized the house. And that type of transaction can also be carried out on Ethereum. So there are lots of other examples, and I do want us to talk about all of them, but that gives you a brief introduction to smart contracts. Now, what makes this so important, Rick, is that the efficiencies that are created by smart contracts, as opposed to doing the way we do things now, are going to be so massive. It's very, very similar to the kinds of efficiencies that are created by Amazon.com versus going to a store and picking a product off a shelf. Now, there are still people that prefer to shop that way, and that's just great. But the truth is, so much more business is now transacting online simply because of the efficiencies that are created. And the truth of the matter is that industries and individuals who embrace these efficiencies early are going to have an enormous leg up on their competition. Now, what that means is that smart contracts is going to be the way that human beings agree to things in the future, not the old way by non-verbally negotiating or verbally negotiating or hiring lawyers to negotiate for us. So much of what we do as human beings is going to be negotiated on the blockchain. And really, there's going to be no negotiation. What will happen is the smart contracts are written, and some people will buy into them and some people won't. The implications for this are so profound because we take so much for granted in our society. We have a legal system that we rely on. We have a system of values that's represented in our culture that we rely on to dictate so many of these contractual experiences that we have, making negotiations with people, agreeing to do things in any way. In the future, very, very enormous amounts of this will be tokenized, will be actually carried out on a blockchain. In other words, it's really a new phase of the legal system itself. Now, when we talk about the legal system, a lot of folks don't realize or don't think much about the fact that our legal system is based on Jewish law. Our legal system that we take for granted in the West is really derivative of the Ten Commandments that are written of in the Old Testament, and then a whole lot of other laws that are written about in the Old Testament. And what's nice about that system is that there is a very strong moral core to the entire thing. Okay, so what we often don't think about is not just how legal our legal system is, not just how lawful it is, but also how moral it is. The legal system that we take for granted in our society has a very strong moral foundation. Ultimately, it comes from God himself. And that's how it all began. Now, of course, it got much more elaborate over time, but our legal system has been based on these old ways of developing contractual arrangements, which is usually a combination of the laws themselves and our common sense human interpretation of these laws. What's about to change, or what's already changing, is when blockchain enters the picture, the terms of every social contract will be written by the people who are writing the smart contracts. And so one of the biggest reasons that we want to reach Christians with this awareness is that we want to make sure there's a strong moral foundation into the smart contracts that are written that's going to govern so many of the choices that we have in the future. I stand before you right now, I sit before you right now, basically advocating for the idea that we preserve a lot of the moral foundation of our legal system as we transition to this blockchain technology that is going to replace the kinds of negotiations and discussions that people have had at temples and churches for the last 3,000 years. Well, what's going to be happening now is it's all going to be happening electronically. And that could be a very good thing, as long as the moral core of what we want to have our human lives be about is preserved in those smart contracts. Is this making sense, Rick?
Oh, definitely, Alex. I was thinking about how, when you were talking about that, that is true that the biblical basis of our current legal system, and how, it's interesting that when you look at the covenant between God and Israel, and then now in the new covenant that we have with God, and in both of those are agreements. They're, basically, in essence, a contract, because God made promises to the people about what he would do and the protections he would provide. And then the stipulations in the contract were that we would follow the agreement. And as long as we upheld our end, he would certainly uphold his end. Now, we know God is completely faithful, and he never goes back on his word. So when he says he's going to do something, then he does it. He's never broken any contract. When the people of Israel sinned and they did wrong, and they basically violated the contract that they had with God, and then they turned around and received the punishments, the curses, which were also elaborated in the law. Now, what I think is interesting is that this can be applied to business, because we know that contracts define the terms of the relationships between those who want to conduct business, right? They want to sell things, or like you were talking about, wanting to sell a house, and the other person wants to buy it. So they need to come to that agreement about it. And it's interesting to me, because I know that anyone who's hired by the government to perform services is called a contractor. And it doesn't matter what service they provide, whether it's construction or information technology, anything like that at all, they're always referred to as a contractor. And so I'm glad to hear more about this. I think that it's so fascinating to look at how our legal system operates, and to understand that the blockchain, like you said, is going to radically alter how we look at all of these relationships in terms of business and otherwise. So tell us more about that.
That's right. Well, that's right. So what's going to change is the nature of the transactions themselves. In other words, it will be electronic in the future, and there won't really be a need to actually talk to another human being. And my best guess is, for a lot of our listeners, That's probably a pretty scary thought, especially at first. This is new. And something that I'd like to follow by saying that is that I actually do think it could be scary, but I don't want our Christian listeners to make the mistake of basically saying, oh, blockchain bad, because it seems scary. I actually think that's a big mistake. The first problem is, of course, is that blockchain is coming, whether you think it's scary or not. I'm very sorry to tell you, it's like the Borg in Star Trek. Resistance is futile. It would be like trying to stop the internet in 1999. It would not have worked. The benefits of the benefits of the internet for everyone were so immense that it was going to happen, and of course, it has happened with some pluses and minuses. The big message that I want Christians to understand is that blockchain technology actually has the capacity to enforce very positive behavior. And it also has the capacity to either prevent or also punish negative behavior. And in fact, that is one of the things that smart contracts are very frequently designed to do. So all different kinds of graft, all different kinds of dishonest behavior can be prevented by some of the cryptographic technology that prevents certain kinds of forgery, certain kinds of faking, certain kinds of, we would call it bearing false witness. You can't pretend to be somebody else effectively on the blockchain. You might get away with it once, you'd never get away with it twice. Most times they make that irrelevant because you're talking about transacting funds, which can be identified securely so that we're sure you actually do have the money. You're not just saying I have the money and then scooping up the product and running off with it. So there's a lot of bad behavior that can be prevented by blockchain. And as Christians, we should like that. I want to be clear that blockchain benefits the honest. It benefits the person of good moral character. It benefits the person who actually wants to provide a good or a service or a benefit to the community. Blockchain will tend to reward those people. The smart contracts are usually designed to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. And so I'm hoping that Christians can get excited about the idea of, basically being able to participate in a new way of enforcing laws, a new way of enforcing contracts, which will seem different at first, and I know that, but that actually could lead to a better world that actually benefits those of us who were honest in the first place, who are striving to be moral in our fiber in the first place. You mentioned government contracting, and that they call them contractors, of course, because the government signs a contract with the businesses that are the contractors. And it's a very lengthy process. There's the request for proposals phase, and then you have to provide the proposal and then get the contract approved, and payments apparently take forever, all the government contractors I talk to. And so, so in the future, extremely likely that those will be smart contracts. And how it will work is that the contractor will essentially buy a token, and the way they buy the token is by performing the work. And they'll perform whatever work is required, and perhaps the token is written so that when they're halfway done, they get half the money that the government's going to pay them. And when they're completely done with the job, they get the rest of the money. Now, that raises a very interesting question, which is something that I wanted to talk about today, which is the concept of oracles. And so what an oracle is a decentralized program that gathers information that is not on the blockchain, but puts it into the blockchain. So believe it or not, Rick, there is a program called Chainlink, for example, which is, by the way, also a cryptocurrency that drives the oracle. And what Chainlink does is it collects information from all kinds of different sources. And in this case, we would imagine it collecting information about the completion of a job for the government. So for example, maybe you're installing telephone wires for a government contract where they want telephone wires to be put underground. The oracle, believe it or not, would find ways of determining your progress on that job. And it could be a third party who's hired to evaluate the progress, but it could also be things like actually testing the transmission of those phone lines once they're installed. The Oracle is not limited to a single source of information. It can collect multiple sources of information. And those sources would probably be written into the smart contract. So the contractor would know this is what the Oracle's looking for. It wants to see those transmissions running at a certain speed, whatever they are. And when the wire's halfway laid, they get half the money. And then when their transmissions start running at the agreed upon speed, the rest of the money would automatically be transmitted to the contractor's crypto wallet. And that's the way smart contracts will work in the future. So these oracles are very, very interesting. I do encourage people to look into the Chainlink program and to decide whether they want to potentially buy some Chainlink currency on a dollar cost average basis. Now that we're talking about buying crypto, Rick, you know that I have to give our disclaimer. Of course, this is not financial advice. Neither Rick nor I are a licensed financial planner. We don't give financial advice. We're here to educate and potentially to entertain about blockchain and how it fits into our moral and religious framework. But it is something that I do encourage people to look into because it's a very interesting program, Chainlink. There are also other decentralized oracles out there that folks might want to look into. For today, I'm just going to limit our discussion to Link. But Link is the way that smart contracts can be fulfilled. So many, a very high percentage of smart contracts actually rely on the Chainlink program to supply the information that lets the contract know whether or not one of the parties or both of the parties are fulfilling their end of the deal. And then usually there's a financial end to some of that deal. But not all transactions have anything to do with financial transactions, but there's always at least a tiny bit of cryptocurrency that has to be burned in the course of carrying out a smart contract. Now,
Alex, let me break in there for a minute. Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and it sounds interesting to me about this, is that the big difference, or one of the big differences, is that this the smart contracts are going to allow for greater transparency into the fulfillment of these various contracts. Because obviously that's the point of business, is to set up an agreement. I say I'll perform some service for you, and then once I've performed it, you pay me. And I know that can be such a problem for people who get involved in business agreements. That's why people end up in court and in lawsuits, because they say they performed the work and they didn't get paid, or all those types of things. So this idea of transparency to me is fascinating, and I really believe that's a wonderful thing, and that actually really supports what we're talking about being able to have morality be more a part of contracts. Because obviously most of us understand about the way contracts work, right? We, like you said, when you're selling a home, you get presented with 100 pages that you have to initial and sign, and if you actually sat there and read through the entire thing, everyone would be there all day and into the night, and no one generally does that, right? Right. Typically, you sign and then you look at it later. But the interesting thing to me is that the transparency factor it can be applied across the board, that it isn't enforced one direction but not the other. Like, oh, well, the contractor has to do what he says, but the person employing them also has to make good on their end of the deal.
That's exactly correct. And in fact, that would be installed into the electronic coin in the first place. So it would be, in the example we were using, it would be a telephone wire coin that's built on the Ethereum blockchain, and it's already built in. In other words, once the Oracle determines that you have completed that work, then the entire thing would transact, and you would get your money. And in many cases, there would not be a need to involve a human being in those conversations. The entire thing would occur on the blockchain, basically governed by an electronic process, what you're talking about, Rick, is the transparency aspect is the most important thing, or a very, very important thing, because this is exactly how blockchain works. As we've discussed in previous shows, it keeps an unalterable ledger of all the information that was collected, so that even if the Oracle made a mistake, it would be recorded correctly. Okay, so let's just pretend the Oracle made a mistake somehow, and that's what jammed up the transaction. That mistake would be recorded on the blockchain and would be referenceable on a 100% secure basis. It would not be forgeable. You wouldn't be able to go back and change that or pretend like it didn't happen the way it happened. Everything that happened in that transaction would be recorded in perfect imperfection on the blockchain in an unalterable state. And in my opinion, this is going to benefit those of us who are honest businessmen. In other words, if you're a good Christian and you're looking to make your community a better place, and you offer a good product for a good price or a good service for a good price, the advent of blockchain is going to be an enormous benefit to your operation. Other people will be able to look at your transaction history and know that you deliver a good product for a good price. If there are any disputes, they'll be recorded on the blockchain, and they'll be easily discernible and easily fixable, because you'll be able to see exactly what happened. Somebody failed to pay or something happened, and there won't be any need for, going to court and making different protestations or anything like that. It'll be a pretty hard and fast record. And so this is what I want Christians to get excited about, is that this blockchain technology will very much benefit those of us who are honest, and those of us who understand the value of a hard day's work, those of us who are doing our level best to benefit our community. We're the ones that are going to benefit when blockchain takes over. And it's the dishonest folks, the people, the scammers, the grifters, the ripoff artists. Those are folks that will have no place to hide in the blockchain economy. There will not be room for people that are trying to pull the wool over your eyes or anything like that. Everything will be recorded up front and on the back end as well. And really, really a good situation for potentially creating a more morally based society, especially if we can embrace this early. And that's the key, is having Christians open their mind to this new way of doing things. Will be a little bit scary at first, but understanding that there's immense positive potential. I would love to see in a year there be a very strong moral presence in the blockchain space and consistent advocacy for more and more morality being built into smart contracts, just making sure that everything is equal, everybody gets their fair share, all the principles of Christianity that we love so much, making sure that it's available to everyone on an equal basis, making sure that each person gets rewarded for equal amounts of work, getting away with any type of oppression, any type of discrimination, and promoting the values that we've come to love as Christians. All of this can be accomplished in a verifiable way on the blockchain.
Well, Alex, that's just awesome, and I really do appreciate your bringing all this to us. It's an incredible opportunity that I see, and it's very exciting. It's wonderful to recognize that we can participate in this type of technology and be able to influence it for the positive, and to be able to put our Christian values out there.
Where I'd like to close up today is by making the case for Ethereum. So Ethereum is like a 1940s Packard compared to a Model T Ford. It is a whole lot better than that first in class. Ethereum does things that Bitcoin can only hope to do. And I'm sure that our listeners are pretty interested in this particular blockchain. However, it is also first in class, okay, the same way that maybe a 1940s Packard was the first, fully enclosed car with a V8 engine, let's just say. Well, Ethereum is the first blockchain that can support smart contracts. It was actually originally designed as an experiment, and one of its founders, Charles Hoskinson, actually gave away his Ethereum. He gave away 250,000 Ethereum, which today would be worth about $500 million. He gave it to his secretary because he didn't think it was ever going to be worth anything. It was just an experiment, something he worked up with a couple of his friends. Well, the experiment has completely taken off. And there's all sorts of dApps and all sorts of smart contracts running right now on the Ethereum blockchain. However, by modern standards, the thing is pretty slow. It takes minutes to close a transaction on Ethereum, and the network gets clogged. And when the network gets clogged, the price of transacting on the Ethereum network goes up. So it can cost you $35 to do a $50 transaction on Ethereum. And that does not sound good to me. Now, it also only costs $35 to do a $5,000 transaction on Ethereum. But remember, we're not just talking about doing big transactions. We're talking about doing every transaction on blockchain. And so the idea that it can cost $35 or $50 to transact on Ethereum when the network is clogged is not a good thing. What is happening is that a lot of blockchain designers have developed what are called level 2 solutions. Level 2 solutions are what are called side chains, and they're able to take transactions off of the Ethereum network while it's clogged, run the transaction, make it happen, and then eventually put it back on the Ethereum blockchain. And those side chains absolutely do reduce the gas fees of using Ethereum. They can reduce them by almost 95%. And it could be that level 2 solutions actually solve the problems with Ethereum. It could be that these superchargers and better tires are going to make that 1940s Packard compete on a modern racetrack. However, you can tell by my choice of metaphor that I'm not entirely convinced by this. The case for Ethereum is that level 2 solutions that include programs like Polygon. There's another one called Harmony, which is the one token. These are side chains and roll-up chains that use a particular technology to relieve the stress on the central Ethereum blockchain. And the other thing that may help is when Ethereum 2 comes out. So a second version of Ethereum is coming out. However, I want everybody to know a little bit about that technology. They are not rewriting the Ethereum blockchain. The original 1940s Packard will always be running in the center of Ethereum 2. Ethereum 2 is actually a layer 2 solution where they're going to run side chains and what are called shard chains on the outside of Ethereum that absolutely will reduce the gas fees on the main Ethereum chain. The question that I have is, will that actually work? And I'm going to let you know, Rick, I've got some pretty deep suspicions about that. There's no question that you can get experts on here that will tell you that it absolutely will work, that definitely it will work, that Ethereum will be the preferred blockchain for the next 20 years. And that could be true, and I wanted our listeners to hear that case. I will also tell you that there are folks that sort of intuitively know that even if you do, that if you do supercharge a 1940s Packard, if you put better tires on it, and maybe even a new suspension, it really will run a whole lot faster. But I'm not sure it will ever compete with a modern Indy car, okay? The modern Indy car is built from the ground up to be a much faster vehicle. Every single thing about it is designed for speed in ways that the 1940s Packard simply was not. When the Ethereum blockchain was originally built, no one had the idea that so many people would be transacting so many things on it. It simply wasn't designed to carry the volume that it has today, much less the volume that it's going to have in 10 years. And this is where the more modern blockchains, which we call level 1 solutions, come into play. We've mentioned a few of them on the show, and I'll mention a couple of them now. These include programs like Cardano and Algorand and Cosmos. Solana is another level 1 blockchain, and of course, one of my personal favorites, Avalanche, which may even be a level 0 blockchain. But I think that all of that is going to have to wait for a second show. So Rick, it's been great introducing our listeners to this today. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to do this show, and I really can't wait till we do another episode.
Well, short thing, Alex, this definitely has intrigued me. The ending here sort of whets my appetite to want to find out all the more about everything we talked about. Thanks so much for your help today, and we'll look forward to it. God bless.
God bless.